Eliza Hittman is the writer and director behind Never Rarely Sometimes Always, which is one of the most critically acclaimed films of the year. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Eliza, and I wanted to just start with how you came up with the idea for this film and what that writing process was like in the beginning.
Yeah, it started with a newspaper article. I read about the death of this woman named Savita Halappanavar in Ireland, who passed away because she was denied a life-saving abortion. And from reading about that story, I started thinking about, well, how far would she have had to travel to save her life? And then I started researching what is insensitively known as abortion tourism and the journey that many people take all over the world when they cannot get access. Um, and I started thinking about what that story looks like in the context of America and Trumpian America. And I spent a lot of time on the project and researched it quite extensively. Um, but I don't know what the exact timeline would be for like how long it took me to write the script. Sort of was a project that I was thinking about and working on over the course of like 5 years.
Well, I mean, there's a real authenticity to the kind of conversations that the main character Autumn has throughout the film with the workers and the people at the clinics. So, how much research did you put into making sure that that dialogue felt as realistic as possible?
Mhm. I spent a lot of time researching and working with Planned Parenthood. I would go and I would tour clinics and meet with doctors and meet with social workers and just try and ingest as much information as I could about how these conversations unfold, but more specifically, what it's like to interact with minors who travel from out of state. But I also looked beyond Planned Parenthood because I didn't want the film to feel like an infomercial or propaganda for Planned Parenthood. So I went to some other places like Choices in Queens and just tried to hear as many perspectives as possible. And then through that, sort of formulate my own point of view as to what it would be like for this character at this age, at this moment in her life.
Mhm. And one of the elements that I found really fascinating about the film is that Autumn isn't really a character that you can easily classify. You get a sense in the beginning that maybe she's a bit of an outsider. She's kind of on the quiet side, but I don't think she really fits into a box like we see with a lot of characters who are in high school. And in a way that makes her feel more like a real person.
Mhm.
So how were you able to define Autumn and who she really was at her
Mhm.
core when you were trying to write the script?
Well, I think I knew who she was at her core. And it was about figuring out like what that looks like, because I think all of my characters in some ways are sort of extensions of me, and they represent or explore like certain parts of like my kind of pain and isolation. And I think it was a challenge to not make her like a type, like a cliche or a stereotype of the way that we think about teenagers, like on film. And part of that identity kind of came with Sydney Flanigan, who we cast, because I didn't want to impose something on Sydney. I wanted it to feel natural to her. So we had a lot of conversations about who that character was, what felt right to Sydney. And it was a negotiation. Like we went through racks of clothing and, thrift store shopping just to like find the character through the wardrobe, which can be quite a journey. But it was important, for me that she didn't feel like a stereotype. And at the same time, that she felt quite ordinary and relatable.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Sydney Flanigan gets cast in the lead role. What was it about Sydney that felt right for the part of Autumn?
Mhm. Well, when I started thinking about this film, like way back in 2012, 2013, when I had the initial seed for the idea, I met Sydney. My editor, who has edited all my films, is also my partner, and he's a filmmaker and was working on a nonfiction piece in Western New York. And through kind of collecting subjects for that movie, we met Sydney very randomly. So, and we added all of the potential subjects for that film on Facebook. So we had all of these kids sort of in our news feeds, and Sydney was one of them. And I wrote her in 2013. I said, "Hi, I have this idea for a movie. I'm working, with Scott, who you've met. Do you want to meet?" And she never wrote me back. But over the years, as I continued to develop and think about the project, she was in my mind. But I didn't know if she would do it. And then while we were casting, I felt like I wouldn't be satisfied unless I followed through with that initial impulse and had her audition. So we reconnected with her and asked her to audition. And her initial tape was like it was very strong, I would say. She had a lot of intuition about acting, and just a lot of vulnerability and fragility, but also kind of confidence. Like, I believed in her. I felt she could take this trip.
Well, one of the key components of the film is that it's not just her venturing out to get the abortion on her own. She's joined by her cousin and they have a really close relationship. And it's another thing that we don't always see often, which is, a family member who is around the same age, who is also really her best friend.
Mhm.
Why was it important to you to include her cousin
Mhm.
Skylar as the sort of
Mhm.
key relationship in the film?
Mhm. I Yeah, I am interested in those sort of family dynamics, and I don't think you see them. And when you live in a small place, you have a lot of family around, an extended family. So yeah, I thought it was important. I felt like she needed the support to get to New York, but I didn't want that character to be, overly precocious, or sophisticated. It was had to be both of them sort of figuring it out together. And I think it's true to life. Like, I've gone with many friends to Planned Parenthood for various reasons. And there's like just a fundamental kind of compassion that you have for somebody going through those things. And I was really drawing upon, the support that I've given people in the past going through similar things.
And something that is very striking, I think, about the film is how it really places you within the mind of Autumn and Skylar too. And it's not just like the awkwardness and the pain of being a teenager, which is very
Mhm.
universal, but specifically a teenage girl dealing with boys and being in a very patriarchal society. And, some of that is more overt than other moments in the film. Is that something that you always planned on incorporating into the film, or is that something that kind of developed naturally as you were writing it?
Well, as I was writing it, I realized how many kind of scenes, like the type of scenes that wouldn't work in the script. And I think those challenges posed roadblocks for me as a writer, but I found my way around them. It wouldn't have worked if we had to sort of listen to them talk about the planning, because that would have killed the momentum of and the cinematic tension of the film. And I had to sort of trust that I could take a lot of exposition out, and that their communication on some level could be underneath. the line. And I am interested, in writing really sort of sparse scripts and sparse stories that are more driven by image and emotion and theme than plot and dialogue. Um, so that is always my goal and intention in a script. But I like also thinking about dialogue in this other way, that you can, as a filmmaker, write and document thought on screen. And I do think the audience spends a lot of time during the film reading their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to ask if you found any difficulties in once you're in the filming process of figuring out the best way to communicate what Autumn was really feeling, and
Mhm.
considering it's such an internal journey that she's going through, and what the process was of guiding Sydney to bring her to life.
I think she understood it, Sydney. I think the job of the director in that situation is to refresh the actor,
Mhm.
because you're shooting out of sequence and jumping around from location to location. And a lot of our locations were live, or real, and it wasn't, so there was a lot of chaos and movement in between shooting. And I think, my job was to remind her, refresh her, and bring her back into that space. But Sydney always knew the interior emotional arc of the character.
That's pretty remarkable for a first time performer, I must say. And I'm sure many people have asked you about this before, but the scene that gives the film its name, never
Mhm.
rarely, sometimes always, is just very direct and emotional. And it's one of those scenes that is asking a lot from someone who's making their film debut. And I imagine there was a lot of pressure to get that scene right. What were your priorities for just getting the best performance out of
There
Sydney on that day?
there was pressure to get it right, and I added pressure, I would
Oh,
say. Um, I shot that scene, and it was always in the plan to shoot it as a long take.
hmm.
But we shot 16 millimeter, which is different than shooting digitally. So there's more risk, there's more stakes. And I think that both Sydney and Kelly Chapman, who is the counselor, who actually is a real counselor, could feel that in the room, that we're turning the camera on and we're not calling cut. It's a different, when you shoot digitally, it means nothing to shoot a long take because it doesn't cost anything. You just lose time. You don't lose anything else. You can just throw it away and start again. The take that's in the film, it's the first take. You know, it
That's remarkable. Yeah.
yeah. Sydney was ready to do it.
Mm.
We prepared, like, in a little room, an office in Planned Parenthood, but kept her alone and isolated before we shot so that she was really in the right headspace before shooting the film. And she was a little overwhelmed at first, I think, because it was a long scene and I had timed it to be the exact length of a can of film. Um, and I told her, like, right before we sat down to shoot, I said, don't worry about the characters' answers in the beginning when they go through your general medical history. Just answer, like, from your own medical history. And I think that started her off, like, in a very personal place and allowed her to go much deeper throughout.
Wow. Well, I imagine this past year was not the most ideal for a filmmaker to have their film seen, but I'm curious what the response has been from people who have been the most affected by the film.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a different experience to be promoting, obviously, all online.
Mhm.
And it feels a little like the movie is happening in a void. And I usually, I'm not like a social media person. I'm not good at social media, but I did make my Instagram account public. And I have been engaging with people watching the movie on Instagram a little bit and hearing people's personal stories and making that a space for people to share, because I do think that the film, taps people's experience who've been through it and they're looking for an outlet to share. So yeah, that's been meaningful. Obviously, it feels funny to be promoting a movie when there's so much suffering around you. Um, and it's hard. That's been, part of it that's challenging.
Well, you are also getting all kinds of nominations and wins for your screenplay, including at the New York Film Critics Awards, which is a pretty high honor, I would say. And Sydney's also earning some love for Best Actress. And
Mhm.
obviously, you don't make what you make for awards, but what have the last couple months been like for you in that regard, getting that kind of recognition that you've received?
Yeah, I think I generally take like the opposite approach. I'm like, what is like the least Oscar-y movie possible to make?
Right.
Like I'll just make a movie about like a second trimester abortion. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It wasn't like obviously anything that I expected. And I don't think I make films that are unanimously palatable. And
Mhm.
I don't think I'll ever be that filmmaker. So it makes the recognition, more meaningful in a way.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how far we can take this awards run for you and Sydney. It's very exciting.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for your support, for writing about
yes,
it.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, Eliza, thank you so much for talking to me today. Congrats on the film and all your nominations.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Yes. And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more interviews and head to goldderby.com to make your award show predictions.